The Awakening of Reality, a Moment in Lavelle Couture. In the heart of Charleston, South Carolina, nestled within a glimmering row of upscale boutiques, there is a place that promises exclusivity. Lavelle Couture is more than a mere store. It's a sanctuary for wealth, status, and everything that epitomizes luxury. Behind its glass doors, it holds a carefully curated world where not just wealth is seen but expected. A world where your appearance often defines your place and worth. Here, the polished leather of designer handbags and the rich scent of expensive perfumes hang in the air, almost as though to remind everyone that money speaks louder than words. But what happens when that unspoken rule is challenged? What happens when someone, whose worth is not immediately apparent to those around her, dares to enter this space and demand not just respect, but recognition? This is the story of Lorraine Hastings, a woman whose presence would forever shift the very perception of Lavelle Couture and the people who ran it. When Lorraine, a 72-year-old woman dressed in a carefully worn cashmere coat, walked into this boutique, she wasn't just a customer. She was a storm in the making. To the staff of Lavelle Couture, she was nothing more than another elderly woman out of place. Someone who would browse, perhaps buy, but never truly belong. They were wrong. As she stepped through the boutique's gleaming glass doors, the cold autumn air followed her inside. She removed her gloves with precision, adjusted her coat, and surveyed the space around her with the calm of someone who had seen much more of the world than the youth working at the counter. It wasn't her first time in such an exclusive boutique, but today something felt different. Perhaps it was the smirks she noticed in the eyes of the young sales associate. Perhaps it was the way the security guard stood a little too close, or perhaps it was the subtle, but unmistakable judgment lingering in the air. But Lorraine, a woman who had faced much harder challenges than this, remained undeterred. At first glance, Lorraine didn't look like the typical customer who would buy a $3,200 cashmere coat. She wasn't dripping in the latest fashion, nor did she carry the aura of someone who appeared ready to splurge. To the employees, this was enough to make assumptions. But Lorraine had spent decades in lecture halls, on academic panels, and mentoring students, most of whom would never experience the life she had. She had never needed anyone's approval to validate her presence. The judgments of the boutique staff didn't faze her. Instead, she was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. As Lorraine walked through the boutique, every step deliberate, every movement purposeful, she wasn't just a shopper. She was a force waiting to be acknowledged. The more the staff underestimated her, the more her resolve strengthened. She wasn't interested in the designer coats or the shimmering handbags, but in the quiet, hidden world of assumptions and prejudices that many people would never notice until they were confronted by it. It wasn't long before the first encounter occurred. A young sales associate, with her bright red nails tapping the counter, shot Lorraine a look. The glance was quick, dismissive, and filled with judgment. Lorraine knew exactly what it meant. She wasn't welcome. Yet she didn't flinch. She wasn't here to impress anyone. Her years of experience, her life in academia, her years of running boards and organizations had taught her something invaluable. Respect is earned, and it's not given based on appearance alone. This moment, this fleeting interaction, was just the beginning. It wasn't the first time someone had misjudged Lorraine, nor would it be the last. But today, Lorraine had no intention of letting the assumption go unnoticed. As she continued to explore the boutique, the tension in the air thickened. The security guard was no longer casually scanning the room. He was positioning himself, subtly, but noticeably, keeping a closer eye on her. And Lorraine noticed it all. For those around her, she was a stereotype. The elderly woman, presumably out of place, maybe just browsing, maybe just looking for something she couldn't afford. But what they didn't know, what they could never have guessed, was that Lorraine was far from just another customer. She wasn't here for approval or validation. She wasn't here to conform to their expectations. What Lorraine Hastings was about to do was challenge not just the attitudes of the boutique staff, but the very notion of who belongs in a world of wealth, luxury, and privilege. She wasn't looking for a designer coat or a handbag. She wasn't here to buy. She was here for something far more valuable: dignity, respect, and the truth about who gets to define the boundaries of belonging in spaces of power and influence. And that's when it happened, the tipping point that would expose the hidden prejudices, challenge the assumptions, and shift the power dynamics in a place where wealth and status usually held the upper hand. Lorraine, with grace and precision, revealed something about herself that none of the staff had dared to guess. As the manager approached, calm and calculated, assuming the problem was with Lorraine's demeanor, Lorraine was about to drop a truth bomb that would unravel their carefully curated world. But before we jump into the revelation and the tension that followed, let's step back and examine the culture that allows such assumptions to take root. What makes someone worthy of respect in spaces like Lavelle Couture? Is it wealth? Is it appearance? Or, as Lorraine was about to prove, is it something far deeper? Something that cannot be judged by looks or stereotypes. The battle of assumptions, a confrontation with bias and prejudice. As Lorraine continued her stroll through Lavelle Couture, every step felt like a quiet declaration. The boutique, with its soft lighting and shimmering displays, now felt like a stage, and Lorraine was the actor in a performance of quiet rebellion. The sales associates, oblivious to who she truly was, continued to make their assumptions that would soon prove to be their undoing. The sales associate, Vanessa, couldn't help but cast glances in Lorraine's direction. Despite the polished smile, Lorraine could read the unspoken words in the way Vanessa avoided making eye contact. It wasn't just the red nails tapping impatiently against the counter or the dismissive glance. No, it was more than that. It was the silent expectation that Lorraine didn't belong. The other staff, too, were complicit, watching from the corners of their eyes, whispering judgments in the most insidious way. The unspoken code of privilege, the belief that certain people belonged in these spaces while others, like Lorraine, did not. Lorraine wasn't new to this game. She had spent decades breaking barriers, earning respect in spaces that weren't designed for someone like her. The halls of academia, boardrooms filled with executives, and conferences with some of the most prominent minds in the world. These were the spaces where Lorraine thrived. But here, in Lavelle Couture, the game was different. It wasn't about intellect or merit. It was about appearance, about assumptions rooted deeply in race, age, and class. The first confrontation came swiftly, an interaction that seemed innocent enough on the surface but held a deeper, more troubling undertone. As Lorraine reached for a coat, the sales associate, Vanessa, spoke up, her tone light yet edged with something Lorraine had heard too many times before. "Ma'am, those pieces are quite expensive," Vanessa had said, as though Lorraine didn't already know the price tags or wasn't already aware that she was standing in one of the most exclusive boutiques in the city. This wasn't about the price. It was about the insinuation, the subtle suggestion that Lorraine wasn't a serious buyer, that she was merely a spectator, someone whose presence didn't quite fit the curated image of Lavelle Couture. Lorraine's response was a calm, measured smile. "Is there a clearance rack I should be looking at instead?" she quipped, a remark laced with irony that only she seemed to fully appreciate. The discomfort that flickered across Vanessa's face in that moment was the first indication that Lorraine's words had landed. The interaction could have ended there, but it didn't. Instead, the store's attitude towards Lorraine escalated. She could feel the invisible walls going up around her. The silent judgments, the subtle surveillance by the security guard, it was all too familiar. She had been in this position before, too many times in her life. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked because of her race, her age, and, in this case, her very appearance. But this time, Lorraine wasn't going to let them get away with it. As she walked through the boutique, she was acutely aware of how the employees were looking at her, how their attitudes shifted. She could feel the weight of unspoken assumptions hanging thick in the air. A second voice joined the conversation when another saleswoman, taller, blonde, and perfectly poised, approached. Melissa, like Vanessa, was quick to inform Lorraine that the coat she was looking at was part of the store's exclusive collection and typically reserved for high-profile clients. The message was clear. Lorraine wasn't part of the exclusive clientele they catered to. This was not just a comment on the coat. It was a comment on Lorraine herself. She wasn't high-profile enough. She wasn't the right kind of customer. Lorraine, however, was not in the habit of being intimidated. She had faced tougher crowds than this, intellectuals who mistook arrogance for wisdom, people who assumed they knew everything about her because of her appearance. But she was not about to let this moment slide. In a voice that was as smooth as silk, Lorraine replied, "I suppose that would make me one of your high-profile clients? Then, wouldn't it?" The reaction was immediate, almost too satisfying. Melissa's eyebrow twitched, and for the first time, Lorraine could see the cracks in their facade. But before Melissa could recover, Vanessa quickly stepped in, attempting to smooth over the tension with a forced laugh and a statement that only confirmed the underlying assumptions. No, of course not," she stammered, but it was too late. Lorraine had already picked up on the flicker of discomfort, the brief exchange of glances between the employees, and the subtle shift in energy. It was becoming more and more clear to Lorraine that this wasn't just about selling high-end clothing. It was about maintaining a social order, an unwritten rule that certain people didn't belong in these spaces. And that's when Lorraine's composure began to shift. The calm, collected woman who had spent decades navigating these environments of privilege and bias now had a choice to make. She could leave and let them get away with their assumption, or she could make them see just how wrong they were. But before Lorraine could make her move, the store's manager, Damien Caldwell, appeared. He stepped into the scene with practiced confidence, exuding the calm authority of someone who had climbed the ranks of the fashion world by playing the game just right. He assessed the situation in seconds, his eyes flicking from Lorraine to his employees, no doubt expecting to see a problem that could be easily handled. What he didn't expect was for Lorraine to turn the tables on him so effortlessly. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice smooth, calculated. But his gaze lingered just a bit too long on Lorraine. The implication was clear. He assumed she was the problem. Melissa, eager to cover up the awkward moment, quickly jumped in. "Not at all, Mr. Caldwell. We were just explaining to this customer that some of our more exclusive pieces require approval before purchase." Approval. That word stung more than it should have. It wasn't the store policies that were being questioned, it was Lorraine herself. The implication that she needed permission to buy something because she didn't fit the profile of their serious buyers was more than just an insult. It was a painful reminder of the social hierarchies that people like Lorraine had fought against their whole lives. Lorraine wasn't just a customer here. She wasn't just a woman in a cashmere coat and gloves. She was someone who had spent her life challenging the assumptions that others made about her and people like her. And now, she was about to make them realize just how wrong they had been. With a slow, deliberate motion, Lorraine reached into her purse. Her fingers tapped the screen of her phone as the silence in the boutique deepened. Vanessa fidgeted nervously, Melissa's smile faltered, and Damien, the manager who had been so composed just moments before, looked on, his eyes narrowing with growing uncertainty. Lorraine wasn't here for the handbags. She wasn't here for the coats. She wasn't here to buy anything at all. Lorraine Hastings was here to give a lesson, one that would resonate far beyond the walls of Lavelle Couture. As she tapped her phone and revealed the contents of an email to Damien, her smile grew. The realization hit him like a freight train. "I own this boutique," she said, her voice calm, controlled. The silence that followed was deafening. The once smooth operation of the store came to an abrupt halt. All of a sudden, the power dynamic shifted. The tables had turned, and Lorraine, standing tall and composed, was no longer the one being judged. Now it was the employees of Lavelle Couture who were forced to face the consequences of their actions. The unraveling a moment of reckoning and realization. As Lorraine's revelation hung in the air, the atmosphere in the boutique shifted. The polished elegance of Lavelle Couture, its gleaming displays, its rows of luxury handbags, its air of exclusivity, began to feel less like a symbol of wealth and more like a facade, one that was crumbling under the weight of its own assumptions. The employees, who had spent their days in the comfortable luxury of their biases, now stood at the precipice of an uncomfortable truth. Damien Caldwell, the store manager, took a step back, his usual poise slipping. The once confident businessman, who had been so quick to dismiss Lorraine, now looked like a man caught in the headlights. His eyes darted between his employees, who stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. It was clear that Lorraine's words had struck a chord, had exposed something that they, and perhaps the entire store, had worked hard to keep hidden. But the power dynamic had shifted. Lorraine, with her calm demeanor, had turned the tables. She was no longer the target of their assumptions. She had become the one in control. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Lorraine, however, remained composed, her posture upright, her expression unreadable. She had lived her life dismantling the expectations that people had of her. This was just another battle in a long line of victories. Victories that weren't won with anger, but with quiet confidence and a steadfast refusal to accept the status quo. The moment stretched on, as if the boutique itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Finally, it was Damien who broke the silence, his voice thin, tinged with desperation. "Miss Hastings, I assure you, this was just a misunderstanding," he stammered. "Our policies are in place to ensure that our customers are treated with the utmost respect." Lorraine's smile was small, but there was nothing friendly about it. "A misunderstanding?" she echoed, her voice steady but laced with a bite. "You think this is a misunderstanding?" Damien nodded, though his uncertainty was evident. He glanced at Vanessa and Melissa, who stood awkwardly behind him, their faces pale and filled with regret. Lorraine could see it in their eyes. They had realized the gravity of their mistake. But it wasn't enough. Lorraine wasn't interested in their apologies. She wasn't interested in empty words. She had heard it all before. "No," Lorraine continued, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a moment that exposes everything wrong with the way you treat people like me." She paused, letting her words settle. "The truth is, the only reason you're standing here listening to me is because I have the power to decide whether or not you keep your jobs. That's the reality." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Lorraine. Here they were, people who had made judgments about her based on the way she looked, assuming that her worth was defined by appearance alone. And yet, she held the power in this moment. She was the one who could bring this boutique, this facade of luxury, to its knees. Damien swallowed hard, his confidence shattered. He had thought the boutique's power was in its wealth, its exclusivity. But he had forgotten the most important lesson of all. Power doesn't lie in wealth or appearances. True power lies in the ability to see beyond the surface, to recognize the value of a person beyond the stereotypes and assumptions. For Lorraine, this moment was about much more than correcting a simple misunderstanding. It was about standing up against a lifetime of prejudice and bias. It was about reminding the people in this room, and anyone who would hear her story, that respect is not a privilege. It's a right, and it's something that should be extended to every person, regardless of how they look or what assumptions are made about them. But Lorraine wasn't finished. She could see the cracks in Damien's armor. He was a man desperate to maintain control, but he had lost it. The realization that his world, the world where people like Lorraine didn't belong, was crumbling around him, was something he couldn't ignore. His mask, once perfectly composed, had slipped, and Lorraine was going to make him face the consequences. "You didn't know who I was," Lorraine said, her voice still calm but carrying an edge. "And that's exactly the point. You assumed that I wasn't serious, that I didn't belong here. But let me ask you, Damien, how many other people have you dismissed today? How many others have you treated the way you've treated me?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Damien's silence spoke volumes. Lorraine could see the guilt in his eyes. She could see the realization dawning on him. This wasn't just about her. This was about the countless others who had walked through these doors and been judged, dismissed, or ignored based on their appearance, their age, or their race. Lorraine wasn't just confronting Damien. She was confronting a system of biases that had allowed this behavior to go unchecked for far too long. As she reached into her purse again, Lorraine pulled out a sleek leather-bound notebook. She flipped it open, revealing an official-looking document with a company letterhead at the top. "You recognize this, don't you?" Lorraine asked, her gaze never leaving Damien's face. His eyes flicked to the paper. The subject line of the document read, "Performance Review and Annual Store Evaluations." Lorraine watched his face as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He knew exactly what she was holding. He knew what it meant. "This store," Lorraine continued, her voice almost soft now, "is already on my radar. I've been reviewing your performance numbers, your customer complaints, and... Oh, what's this?" She turned the page slowly, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. "Multiple reports of discriminatory behavior toward certain clientele." "Interesting, isn't it?" Damien's face drained of color. Lorraine could see the fear in his eyes now. This wasn't just about losing his job. This was about everything he had worked for, the career he had built, coming to an end because of his own actions. The silence in the boutique was suffocating. Lorraine allowed it to linger, knowing that the longer she held the power in this moment, the more the reality would sink in for everyone involved. The power had shifted, and it wasn't going back. She closed the notebook with a snap and set it down on the counter. "So, tell me, Damien," Lorraine said, her voice lowering to a near whisper, "what happens next?" Damien, his hands trembling, opened his mouth but found no words. He was trapped in the web of his own making, unable to escape the consequences of his assumptions. Lorraine stood there, watching the moment unfold. She wasn't angry, at least not yet. This wasn't about anger. This was about justice. It was about calling out the hidden biases that had shaped the way people treated each other for far too long. And today, Lorraine Hastings wasn't going to let those biases slide. With one final, deliberate step, Lorraine turned toward the exit. Her movements were smooth, controlled, and powerful. As she reached the door, she paused, glancing over her shoulder one last time. "Oh," she said, her voice soft but laden with authority. "Expect a call from corporate." And with that, she left. Reflection on the moment. As Lorraine stepped out into the cool autumn air, she couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The battle wasn't over, but this was a moment where the world shifted. Inside, the employees of Lavelle Couture were left standing frozen. Their roles in this encounter forever changed. They had been humbled, made to confront their own biases and assumptions, and forced to face the uncomfortable truth that respect isn't something that can be measured by wealth, appearance, or social standing. The lesson Lorraine imparted that day wasn't just for the employees of Lavelle Couture. It was for anyone who has ever been judged, dismissed, or underestimated. She had shown them that true power lies not in wealth or status, but in the ability to stand firm, to challenge the assumptions of others, and to demand the respect that everyone deserves. Lorraine's story is a reminder that respect isn't a privilege. It's a choice, and it's one that we make every time we interact with someone. It's a choice that can either uplift or degrade, empower or dismiss. And in that moment, Lorraine chose to remind everyone that respect, at its core, is not optional. The change Lorraine had brought about in Lavelle Couture wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever walked into a room and been judged before they even spoke. It was about dismantling the barriers of prejudice and assumption, and showing the world that no one should ever be made to feel small. Lorraine Hastings' story is not just one of personal triumph. It's a powerful reminder of the value of self-respect, dignity, and the need to challenge societal biases. Her calm, composed response to the prejudices she encountered at Lavelle Couture highlights an essential truth. Respect is not earned through appearance or assumptions, but through the acknowledgement of our shared humanity. Through Lorraine's confrontation, we learn that true power does not lie in wealth or status. It lies in the ability to stand up for yourself, demand respect, and break down the barriers of prejudice that often define our interactions. Her experience is a wake-up call to anyone who has ever been judged by superficial standards. Never let assumptions about you define your worth. Lorraine taught us that we should never settle for being treated as less than what we are. She demonstrated how to turn the tables on those who underestimate us and make them face the consequences of their biases. The story of Lorraine Hastings is a call to action for us all, to demand respect and to stand firm against prejudices, no matter where we encounter them. If Lorraine's story resonated with you, and reminded you of the importance of standing up against discrimination. Don't let this powerful message stop here. Like this video if you believe that respect should never be a privilege, but a right for everyone, no matter who they are or how they appear. Share this video to spread Lorraine's message, because the more people who hear stories like hers, the more we can fight against prejudice and break down harmful assumptions. Let's make sure these conversations are happening everywhere, whether it's in the workplace, the classroom, or even in a luxury boutique. Finally, subscribe to stay updated with more empowering stories that challenge the status quo, offer insights into social justice, and inspire change. Your support helps amplify stories that need to be told. Join the movement, challenge assumptions, demand respect,